What's going on, guys? JP back at you once again, bringing you guys day number 24 in my 10th annual 31 Days of Horror, a series in which we watch and review 31 horror films in 31 days, all during the month of October, leading right up to Halloween. And finishing off the Sevrin films titles, I decided to go with one that I picked up fairly recently that I've always wanted to see, because this film has like a kind of interesting history to it. And that film is Dario Argento Presents Wax Mask from the year 1997. Got the slipcover here. This is the other cover art, which is very different. And when I saw this, I was like, is this a Terminator ripoff or something? Like, what's going on here? This sort of like exoskeleton looking thing. So this film is very interesting because legend has it that Dario Argento, back in, I believe, like around 1994, saw Lucio Fulci and felt really bad for him because his health had deteriorated so much. I believe he said something along the lines of he looked so frail when he had ran into him, and you know, his filmmaking works have also slipped. So feeling bad for Lucio Fulci, he wanted to collaborate on a project. I believe they were supposed to collaborate on a project years before that as well that never ended up happening. So they begin working on a remake or another adaptation of the waxwork films, the sort of House of Wax films. And I started working on it, and, you know, Fulci wrote it, and they were, you know, putting effort into it. I believe Argento wanted to add more gore to it. There was a little bit of a contention with that. And from what I understand, Dario Argento got caught up making the Stendhal Syndrome, which, of course, I think began production in around 1995. Came out in 96. And they were finally about to start on this film after a couple of years. And, like, right before they began filming, Lucio Fulci passed away. So he was no longer able to direct it anyway, I believe. But Argento got Sergio Stivoletti to direct the film, who is an effects artist who worked on Opera, Phenomena, Demons, Cemetery Man. Very good work with that guy. And it seems like they put a lot more special effects in this film than maybe were originally intended. But that's the backstory on the film. And I've known that backstory for quite a while, from hearing different podcasts and things like that. And so I've always been curious on this movie, because this was technically supposed to be Lucio Fulci's final film. And it didn't happen, but it's curious to see like how it turned out and kind of sort of fantasize about what would have happened had Fulci actually directed it. But the film itself opens up in, I believe, the year, is it 1900 or is it, I can't remember. I honestly can't remember. It opens up, I think it's 1900, but I could be wrong. And there's basically this murder that happens, and then it flashes forward like 12 years. And we have this new wax museum in town, and basically this girl who was in the beginning of the film gets a job there because her mother taught her how to do costume design, and she wants to do the costumes for the wax museum. Meanwhile, there's someone who sneaks into the wax museum and dies of fright, and then it's basically, you know, a wax work film, you know, a House of Wax film, but with a very, very different outcome and sort of what's going on. They really did some weirdo stuff at the end of the film, but it's a not a very surprising story. Like, you kind of see where the film's going, but I will say that I really enjoyed this movie. I thought the lead actress, who I don't know her name, but I thought she was incredibly beautiful. I looked her up because I wanted to see if she had done any other horror films, and it doesn't really look like she has done much horror films. This version that I watched here, I don't know if I didn't really mess around and like look at the other versions, but yeah, I believe, is it only in English? I don't know. There might be an Italian track, but the English version is dubbed, and it's not really dubbed very well. It's kind of a bad dub for the most part, but it's not horrible though. It's still very watchable. But the lead actress I thought was really beautiful, and I liked her even though her voice was dubbed. And there's a really weird thing that they do with like the wax, you know, the person doing the killings, the villain in this film. I was kind of like, well, that's weird. I didn't really expect that. And even like the whole process of like turning people to wax is very different and stuff. Something about 90s Italian films I actually really like. Stendhal Syndrome is one of my favorite Argento films, and that was made in the 90s. And I've seen a handful of 90s Italian films, such as The Sect by Michele Salve, Suave. I'm bad with his name. Of course, Cemetery Man, the Argento film, Stendhal that I mentioned. There was a few others that I've seen from the 90s, Night Killer, which I just talked about. But the thing about the 90s Italian films that I've tended to notice is they all have like sort of the same feel. They're, while the 70s films were like gritty and dark, I feel like these films are clean and clear. They don't really, they're bright. Something about 90s Italian films, they seem very bright. Like the lighting changed. Like the lighting was more bright all of a sudden. And although I love the gritty 70s and 80s Italian films with the dark lighting, something about the atmosphere of the more bright lit films, I kind of also really like. And I've always kind of wondered what it was with the Italian films of the 90s that like they elicit a certain atmosphere. And I think I figured it out, that it's like the lighting. It changed. The culture of the lighting seemed to have changed in the 90s. And also just like the way the dubbing's done, and the acting, and the, you know, stories and things like that. It's just something, it feels different than the stuff that we had in the 80s. I almost feel like they overwrite the stories in the 90s, whereas they underwrite them in the 80s. But yeah, I thought this film was actually very fun. And for a 1997 Italian film, I mean, what were we getting around the late 90s to early 2000s in terms of Italian films? Like, not much, right? So I think in terms of like it being like a really late Italian horror film, I think it's really cool, man. I thought it was a really fun movie. It has problems. It's not like the most coherent and well put together story in the world, but I actually really enjoyed it. I'm gonna go ahead and give it a 7 out of 10. If you've never seen Wax Mask, I definitely recommend checking it out. Very curious to see what it would have looked like had Fulci directed it, but unfortunately we'll never know. I think Stivoletti did a really good job. And yeah, we'll see you guys tomorrow with Vinegar Syndrome. That's the last of the companies that we're going to be doing. So we got 6 more days of Vinegar Syndrome. So peace out, guys.